It's bank holiday Monday. I have been upstairs doing work, but I've got bored of that and I need a break. So I'm going to come out here and start pulling the gearbox out. I was trying to free the clutch off, but I've got that horrible noise and it's not going to fix itself. And the only real way of doing it is to pull the gearbox. So I'm going to do that as quickly and as cleanly as I can. More than a jiffy later, we have the car in the air. And first look under here and what I need to get out of the way. The good thing is that on this car you've got this like adapter thing on the back of the engine and then the bell housing, and the starter actually bolts to that, so I don't think I need to undo the starter motor from here, which is less faffing about. In other news, that exhaust might actually clear the gearbox when I drop it, so that's a result, because then that's less faffing around. I think I just need to get the prop off. Here's some oil coming out the back of the gearbox as well, which isn't great. Yeah, prop off, box mounts out, speedo sensor disconnected, lower the rear of the box down so I can get to the bell housing bolts, and then the usual fight to actually get it off and out of the car. Making pretty good progress. I've got the prop shaft undone at the front end. I haven't bothered disconnecting it at the rear because you can just move it to one side and there's enough room for the box to come past it. I've disconnected all of the wiring, so that's just hanging down. I've unbolted the clutch slave from the bell housing adapter. I probably didn't need to, but I didn't want to have that preloading the clutch fork with the rod, so I've just undone it and then moved it back. Then undone the bolt between the exhaust and the gearbox mount. And then up in here I've got the main gearbox mount to the transmission tunnel with 2 bolts either side. So I'm going to put my jack in under here holding the rear end up and then lower it down until the gearbox looks like it's clear and I'll be able to get to the bell housing bolts. But I'll put another jack stand under the back of the engine to take the weight so it's not stressing the engine mounts. I also need to get the gear selector out, which undo that 10mm there and then release the detent springs and it should pull out from above. So that's the next bit. Working from above now. Get this gator out. I've undone the 10mm bolt from below, which was that one, which was just holding the cup over bottom of the selector. Then this will lift out once you get the D10 springs out the way. So just lever them. There's one. That just stops you hitting reverse instead of first. When trying to go backwards. Right, there we go. There you go. Selector out of the way. Just stops me bending that bit when I'm wiggling the box out. And that's what the top of the gearbox looks like. This is the rear gearbox mount. It's quite different to the normal manual cars. The manual cars you have just 2 cotton reel, well, I think they go that way round, cotton reel bushes, and then a central damper. This is altogether a much more industrial agricultural unit, but reassuringly solid. Massive steel spacer in here as well, so the rubber bit in here actually looks pretty good, so I think it'll all clean up and go again. So I'll just take it apart when I get some time, clean it up, get it painted, ready to go back in. I now have the rear of the gearbox supported on the jack. I'm debating whether or not to remove the exhaust because I have a stainless one to go in and I've got such good access that I might as well, because it's probably going to have to come out anyway later, and I might as well do it now just to give myself a bit of additional clearance. So I'll get some WD-40 and lube up the bolts at the front there, and then while that's doing its stuff I'll lower the gearbox and everything as well. In fact, that's the point, I need to get it off anyway, because if I try and lower the engine, it'll just crack at the manifold if I don't, because there's no flexi in this, it's just all mounted, hanging off the turbo manifold. So yeah, that will need to come off. It's about an hour and a half since I started doing this. The gearbox is supported on that stand. Sorry, yeah, the gearbox is on the jack. That is on the rear lip of the sump, holding the engine up. I've undone all the bell housing bolts, so it's free to come back now. Most of the bell housing bolts are quite easy to get to because they're nice big hexes. I think they're 17s, and they're nicely placed and easy to access. The only two that were tricky were right on the top, and for those I had to shove all my extensions together, and even then it was a bit of a battle to get them to crack off because there's so much slop torqued up in that, but I got them eventually. So I'm going to wiggle that backwards on the jack and hopefully elegantly drop it to the floor. That doesn't always happen. Most of the time it just falls off the jack and goes bang, but I'll try and avoid that if I can. And there she is, quite a big lump. Got our first look at the front side here. You see, that's the release bearing, and when you spin it, it's not bad, but you can hear it. So I'm hoping that's some of my noise. That's the fork. It looks a fair bit meatier than the V8 ones. I'm not sure whether it is or whether it's just my poor memory, but I swear that that web is deeper. Spline feels okay, no real significant play. And then our first look at the clutch and the flywheel. So there you have it. There's a lot of wear to these teeth, like on the ends of the fingers. Massive wear lip, which isn't great. So next step, undo all of the clutch cover bolts progressively and see what kind of condition that all looks like. Here we have the clutch cover or pressure plate, and you can see the amount of rust build up on there. So obviously it was sat for a long time. This side, it has got some really quite deep, as I was pointing out earlier, but you can see them a bit better now, ridges in the fingers. Originally, because this is a non-self-centering clutch, the fingers would be flat and the front face of the release bearing is curved like that. So we have a curved surface on a flat surface, so as this goes in and out it bends across the finger. So for them to have been, you know, with a channel run into them like that, I don't think that can have been just me in my various road tests, although it probably, it could well have been, I don't know. But oh, nice ringing noise as well. I'm hoping that that last noise I got when I was driving the car, yeah, that sounds like a spring has broken maybe in here. I don't know. Well, anyway, I'm going to be changing all of this, so hopefully when it's all back together, no long-term damage has been done to the engine or the car. There's the friction plate and it's still stuck to the flywheel. I haven't actually tried to remove it yet, but just by hand that does not want to come off. So most cars, you take the friction, the pressure plate off and this would just drop out, but it isn't, so it's well on there. There we go. And there we have it. That's the working surface of the flywheel, and again it's very rusty. The good news is that there is no oil or anything from the back of the engine, so the rear main oil seal is good. Spigot bush has lots of grease in it, which is nice. I was wondering whether to pull the flywheel off in order to clean it up, and if I was going to do that, change the rear main seal. So not today, but another time I'll probably pull the flywheel and have a look in there and look how involved that is, or go and look in my workshop manual. But yeah, that friction plate looks bollocks. I think it's cracked as well. running through here and up there as well. So in fact there's lots of cracks. It's breaking up. Yeah, don't know whether you can see that one down there, here. So pretty much everywhere there's a spring or a rivet, it's showing that it was breaking. So yeah, I'm happy I've gone to all the bother of pulling this lump out now, because it's not the easiest of jobs in the car park. But yeah, good to have that done. I have also got others to compare it with. This here is a new clutch assembly that I got from Colin. This is a later self-centering assembly, so the friction plate is the same, but the cover and the release bearing are different. The idea being that this the actual bearing can self-center when it goes in and off with the fork. So I'm looking to upgrade that. I was a bit confused because the part number comes back to being a Land Rover TDI, but basically I'm going to have a good measure up of the distance between the clamping face of that and the working height of the clutch fork and compare it to the assembly that's in there, and then just double check that that's all right before I fit it. And then in here we have another clutch that came out of that donor engine that Colin gave me. So that's what the clutch fingers should have looked like, nice and flat and smooth, not indented like my ones. And then also, for helping me put the gearbox back in, I've got an input shaft off another gearbox that I blew up in my drift car, so that I'll use as my clutch alignment tool. So I'm going to tidy up a bit and then take some reference measurements from the height of that assembly and compare it with the height of the assembly that I've got in those parts, just make sure it's all compatible. So I've bought my two assemblies inside. Black is the one I've just removed, which is a non-self-centering clutch assembly. This one is self-centering, and what I wanted to reassure myself was that the overall height between where the clutch fork acts on the release bearing to the mounting surface of the clutch on the flywheel is the same, because what I didn't want to do is fit this new one in the car and then put my foot on the clutch and find that it was only half depressing this, or you know, it was binding or something funny going on. So I have got them both on a reasonably flat table, and the distance from what would be the flywheel to the acting face of the fork, which is that bit, when it's in the car, is about 83 mil, and that is the same as this one. So that bodes well. What of course I haven't replicated here is the springs being partly compressed by the friction plate being in there and this being bolted down on the flywheel, but it should be the same when the relaxed or not relaxed in terms of the overall height should match between the two. So if I was being really pedantic, what I could do is go take the flywheel off the car, put the new friction plate in here, bolt the cover plate to the flywheel and then measure it, and then do exactly the same with that, and they should come out the same. I might do that, or I might just not bother because I'm pretty sure it's right. But there are other things that I need to look at before trying to put this all back together again. So things I want to do before I put it all back together. The first is clean off all that crap, just to make it nice and clean in there, and then re-lube the clutch fork. Second is drain all the oil out of the case and maybe flush it through with some ATF and white spirit to clean all the gunk out, because that will have sat there for a long time. I also want to change all of these rubber bushings in the selector. There's two there, two down there, same on the other side, and basically they act as vibration insulators between your hand, which is on the gear stick here, and the engine and gearbox, which is all vibrating. But they get covered in oil and then they go kind of gloopy. They're not so bad on this one, but from experience they swell and then they break up and then they fall apart and you end up with a load of slack. So I'll replace those. And then in the underside of here there is a rod which the selector engages in back there, and it takes the movement from the actual selector shaft in the box there, and it sits in two very thin-walled bushes, and they can wear out. So when I take that off, I'll check all of that for play. And then the last thing is at the back here, we got oil leaking out from what I think might be the rear main oil seal, so I'll order another one of those, and then I'll have to undo that big nut, get the drive flange off, and pull that seal out and put a new one in. I'm still undecided as to whether to change the main seal in the back of the block, so I think I'm almost certainly going to have to remove the flywheel just to clean up that friction face. So I'll make another judgment on that when I get the flywheel off. Now that is what you call a flywheel. It is huge. I don't know how heavy it is, but it's freaking heavy. And it's not like there's a lot of meat cut out of the back either. So that's probably why trying to shock the thing off by starting it was never going to work. There's just so much mass in that, it's sucking up all the inertia. So yeah, I don't think driving this around the car park was ever going to free it off. I think the fractures to that friction plate kind of show the story as well. I'm trying to work out the best way of cleaning this surface up now, because I've read somewhere a long time ago that using sandpaper is a bad idea because you basically impregnate the steel with silicone. I'll have to go and do some internet revision on how best to get rid of this. It might be that just using, I don't know, steel wool or something to abrade it works. I don't really want to have to go to the expense of machining it, because actually when you run your finger across it, there's really no wear lipping. I don't know what you know, there's no wear lip at all there. It is just crap stuck to it. So yeah, I don't think it needs to be skimmed. I think it just needs to be cleaned. Then hopefully with the new friction plate we'll clean that up anyway as it's running. This is a video of my progression of cleaning. That is uncleaned. This bit has been wiped down with panel wipe and then a steel brush just to remove the surface rust. That gets most of the way through, and then for the final bit I have done what I said I wouldn't, which is just use some sandpaper, but trying not to polish it up. This has to be rough because it's supposed to be transmitting friction, so I'm not using a high-speed drill with a wire wheel on it because that will just polish it. I'm just trying to clean up the best I can. I definitely want the rust off because I don't want that get impregnated into my new friction material. I can't find anything on the internet about silicone being bad, so I don't know where I got that from, so I'm just using sandpaper but just not going crazy with it. Right, that's about as far as I'm going to go. The rust is off. Yes, you can still see stuff on here, but I'm quite confident that there's no big scaly lumps of rust, so it should just burn off and end up being a nice steel surface. So I can't imagine with a brand new clutch and friction plate and everything that it'll slip. So yeah, I'm just going to make sure it's really nicely degreased when it's back in the car. I think that's it for today. I'm going to compile a shopping list of bits and pieces I need to buy, and then look to put all this back together again sometime soon.